The next phase in my life takes place in Bell Gardens, California. Bell Gardens is a city in Los Angeles County with around 40,000 residents. In the late 80s, when we moved there, Bell Gardens was pretty rough. I think it was around 1989 that I touched down in Bell Gardens. Maybe 1990. First thing that I noticed when I went outside to play was that I was the only black kid in the neighborhood. That was a bit different for me. Coming from the east side of Long Beach, it was definitely sort of a culture shock. But looking back, I feel like I quickly adapted. And in hindsight, if it weren't for my stepfather's family, I probably wouldn't have done well in Bell Gardens. When I went to my friends' houses who were Mexican or Latino, I knew a lot about the culture already because of my last couple years that I'd spent with my stepfather and his family. Bell Gardens taught me a lot. I also learned at that period of my life that I love Latina women. Like, I really love Latinas, which is probably why I'm married to a beautiful Latina to this day. What was it like being black in Bell Gardens in the 80s and 90s? It had its good times and it had its bad times. Tagging, riding bikes, and skateboarding. Those were some of the good times of Bell Gardens in the late 80s and early 90s. Tagging was huge. Every week on Fox 11, there was another undercover special about tagging crews attacking buses and freeways. I was part of that generation, and it was something to be a part of at that time as you're going through it. I'm not going to tell you what I wrote. For my friends who don't know what I wrote means, that is what I would tag on the wall, because I, unfortunately, looking back, I'm a mid-40s-year-old man now, but I can admit this, but I caused thousands of dollars of damage. Chaka was my idol. I wanted to be like Chaka. Chaka was an LA tagger who went all over LA, Inland Empire, Orange County, all the way up to damn San Francisco, and he would hit up his tag, which was Chaka. There's even famous footage of Chaka tagging inside of an elevator that was inside of a courtroom where he supposedly had a hearing that day regarding him tagging. But yes, I really enjoyed that time, and I had scribers and all kind of Krylon paint. My generation was the reason why. Every time you go into a Home Depot now, the spray paint is behind a glass window, and you have to go ask an attendant to grab a key and open it for you. My generation was the reason for that. Look it up. Late 80s, early 90s. Go down that rabbit hole. Now, when someone spray paints in my neighborhood, I want to chop their head off. But I'm older. I still appreciate good graffiti. And look, I know you're still messing up someone's property no matter what, no matter if it's beautiful or if it's ugly, but I appreciate good graffiti. Hate tagging, appreciate good graffiti. Unless it's on my property or around my property, then I want your head chopped off and I want to cut your hand off. But But yeah, we would go up and down train tracks, the riverbed, and just tag. Me and my friends. I'm not going to give you their names once again because even though that was 30 something years ago, I don't want to get anybody in trouble or anything. We would go to Bell Gardens, or we would ride up and down Bell Gardens on our skateboards and our bikes with our backpacks with Krylons and Scribers, and I can't remember what the big fat pins were called. And we would just hit up everywhere. It was the thing to do. We were kids. We would go to Commerce. We just ride our bikes everywhere. No cell phone, no nothing. Just, hey, Mom, I'll be home, by whatever. We knew it was going back in the days where you kind of knew to be home before the street lights were out. No cell phones, nothing. But we go across town. We go to Huntington Park. All my locals from Bell Gardens know about Huntington Park, Pacific Avenue, Mika Mika. We would go watch movies at the theater down there and just hit up all the way there. By hit up, I mean we would just tag and destroy other people's property. But that's what you do when you're young. Don't have a father figure. Your mom has to work to support your ass who's out there tagging up buildings and things like that. No knock on my parents. This is just what kids do. And that's what I did, and it was fun. Ride my skateboard. This was around the time of Tony Hawk and Paul Peralta and Airwalks. Airwalks were actually not shoes that you could buy at Kmart. I know eventually somehow Airwalks ended up at Kmart. I don't know how that happened. When we were kids, Airwalks was it. Skateboards only had one tail. They didn't have two. You kids don't know about what I'm talking about. We would go to demos, to abandoned pools. And I was never really good at skateboarding, but it was fun because the kids of the neighborhood accepted me. Let's talk about my neighborhood. I grew up on Colmar Avenue. I can't remember my address. 6754, maybe? I can't remember. But I was on Colmar Avenue. I think Lubeck was my cross street. Habaneria was right, like over there. You guys know the area if you're from Colmar. I wasn't by the high school. The high school was like blocks down. I was more towards Bell Gardens Intermediate, which is where I went after I went to Bell Gardens Elementary. Went to Bell Gardens Intermediate. Good times. Had some pretty cool teachers. I remember specifically this one white teacher named Mr. Hatch. And actually, it's cool because I still have friends to this day that I met in Bell Gardens when I was in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. It's so weird. I just thought about that. Had a cool little squad. Like I'm telling you, man, I adapted to Bell Gardens pretty cool. I adapted. And, people were kind of intrigued by who's this black kid. Because I had to keep in mind, I wasn't bald. I had big hair. I had a lot of hair. I stood out. I stood out. There's no way you can know that. Like anyone who went to Bell Gardens Intermediate in the early 90s, there was like 2 or 3 black. There was actually 3 black people. Nope, there was 4. 1, 2, and there could have been more, but I remember there were 4. I know their names. I'm not gonna just throw them out there like that, but because when you're in a school with all Latino, my homeboy Verdine. You know what? I got to give a shout out to my homeboy Verdine. He won't be mad that I gave him a shout out, but he's one of my friends to this day, and he was one of the only black dudes at Bell Gardens. And here's a trip. This is where me and Verdine came in close, and once again, that's my dog to this day. So we went to Bell Gardens together, and then we didn't even know, that both of us were moving. We both end up at Downey High School, because that's the next part of my story is Downey. I moved from Bell Gardens to Downey in 1992, my freshman year, and who do I see when I'm walking down the motherfucking thing on the orientation? Verdine. What up, dog? And So that was kind of cool. But let's go back to Bell Gardens Intermediate. There weren't too many black folks there. 3, 4, maybe 5. And anybody back then could vouch for me. If you grew up in Bell Gardens, you probably know who I am because I was one of the only black dudes there. If you're listening there, you went to Bell Gardens Intermediate in the early 90s, you probably knew who I was. Not that I was all Mr. Cool, Mr. Popular, because I wasn't athletic. I was none of that. I just went to school, did my homework, and hung out with my friends. I had a really good friend. And I'm not going to name his name because it's a little too deep, a little too political. But he was a good friend of mine. We were hanging out, and I just noticed that as we got closer and stuff, we were cool and all that. Eventually, we just started hanging out less and less. And I did notice that he started kind of going more into the gang thing because there was, once again, at this time, during the tagging era, it was borderline where a lot of the tagging crews were turning into gangs. Go down this rabbit hole if you don't know what I'm talking about. But in the early 90s, like tagging crews were tagging crews. And then eventually they just started adding numbers and letters to their crew name, and they ended up linking with local gangs, and it just became that. Then tagging eventually was a gang, and that's when I got out. I was like, nope, I'm good. I ain't not no gang. I'm not built for that life, dog. I like tagging up with my friends and hitting up buses and running from bus drivers, and I like doing that stuff. But I don't. Nope. So that's when I literally put the scribers down, put everything down. I was like, I'm done. When I started noticing going that way, but one of my good friends, he continued to do his thing. And he continued to hang out with other people. And then we just stopped hanging out. Just like that. And didn't understand back then. Like, I was like, did I do something? I don't get it. Like, what's going on, you know? And later on, I understood that he was not really supposed to be hanging out with me because I was a black dude. This is all, keep in mind, this is early 90s, so certain weird politics that had, like, is it once not weird, I'm just saying, certain politics, certain street politics and things started intertwining with friendships and all that. That's happened to everybody. I've heard people who grew up in Compton say, shit, one became a Crip, one became a Blood. They used to be best friends, and then they become, whatever. They just, it happens. And unfortunately, that happened to me, and I lost a good friend. And I hope he's doing okay. I have no idea. Haven't talked to him in couple of decades, easily a couple of decades. That was my dog, man. But being black in Bell Gardens, it wasn't really as hard. And once again, maybe I got in there at a good time. I don't know, but I got accepted right away. And it's so cool because, so I grew up on Colmar, right? And back then, all of my close friends, for whatever reason, because that's just who I ended up vibing with, were 1 year older than me. So if I was in 6th grade, they were in 7th grade. If I was in 7th grade, they were in 8th grade, right? So they're all taller than me. I just remember when I was a kid, them being all taller than me, right? Like it felt like they were super taller than me. Like, damn, these motherfuckers are big. That's how you feel when you're before growth spurts, right? And you're in your 4th grade and your friend is 5th grade or 6th, but he's already, starting to get muscle. They seem big to you, right? Here's the funny part. About less than a decade ago, we all joined a Facebook group and we got together and we decided to meet in Bell Gardens. And I got to meet up with these dudes who I had not seen in years, 20-something years. So it was a great experience meeting up with them. And what was so funny is, now fast forward to whatever year this was, 2015, 20, whatever. I'm a foot taller than everybody. I'm literally a foot taller than everybody. But back then I was the little guy. I was the short kid and they looked like giants to me, dog. And now it's funny because they're all 5'5", 5'6". And I'm not knocking these dudes because I love them. I really do love them, man, because they gave me a great upbringing, man. It's good to have good friends, dude, especially when you're new to a neighborhood and they show me mad love, man. That's where I fell in love with hip hop, was Bell Gardens. Fell in love with hip hop. Maybe 80. See, now I'm starting to think I was there 88, 89. I can't remember, guys. This is all. I just hit record and I'm just going. You know, I could easily sit back and do notes and all that and think about it, but it was 88, 89, something like that. But I fell in love with hip hop, and the first group that I fell in love with, and shout out to the homie Ruben, was NWA, Eazy-E. He let me hear NWA, Eazy-E, and it was like, oh my God, what is this? Because it was probably already at that point a year, maybe a year and a half, it had already been on the streets. But, you know, people in Bell Gardens were bumping Eazy-E and NWA heavy. And my homeboy Ruben introduced me to this. And I'm hearing stuff like, what is this? Fell in love with it off top. I want more of this. I need more of this. In fact, it was in Bell Gardens that I learned what NWA stood for, and ironically, it was a Mexican dude who told me what it stood for. I said, what does NWA stand for? He said, niggas with attitude. I said, oh, okay. All right, that's interesting. I remember like it was yesterday. Like it was yesterday. And me asking him, what does NWA stand for? And him saying, niggas with attitude. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. All right there. So what's for dinner? No, I just did. Keep in mind, this is 1988. The word nigga was not like, it was not a big deal. Another artist that I got introduced to in Bell Gardens and I fell in love with off top, probably wasn't the best example of a person to fall in love with, but to this day, he's one of my favorite rappers. Too Short. Little White Tape. And this was from my homeboy Ramiro, who lived across the street from Ruben. So Ruben introduced me to NWA and Eazy-E. Ramiro introduced me to Too Short. And like anything, and I think the cool part was, I remember Ramiro used to dress fly as fuck. That was one thing. He was a fly motherfucker. I think Ramiro was like, oh, my parents don't even know what he's saying. Like, I was like, how are you allowed to listen to this? And he's like, man, my parents don't speak English, dog. I'm allowed to. I mean, that shit, I'll bump this down. They don't even know what he's saying. I was like, oh, nice. That's a good loophole right there. That's a good loophole, because we were listening to Cuss Words. It was called Cuss Words. And Don't Fight the Feeling. You know, Don't Fight the Feeling. Bum 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 bum. Was it I said my name is Too. All right, I'm not even gonna try. But you know what song I'm talking about. It was Don't Fight the Feeling and Cuss Words, and those were the ones we kept on repeat. Life is too short. Life is too short. I mean, we were 88, 89. We were what I was 11 maybe, listening to this music and soaking it all in, and I needed more. So that's when I just went, anything hip hop, rap related I can get my hands on. It was over from there. I played Pop Warner football. Bell Gardens didn't have a Pop Warner team. If you wanted to play Pop Warner, you either played for the Downey Razorbacks, which was in Downey, or the Bell Eagles. Bell was a city adjacent to Bell Gardens, right over the bridge off Eastern. And you just go to, it was right there. It was at Bell High School. Once again, had a lot of cool experiences there. We would always get our asses kicked by the black schools. I remember, so I knew some of them. Remember I told you, I told you that my friends, my group that I hung out with, they were 1 year older than me, right? They were 1 year older than me. For whatever reason, just majority of them were 1 year older than me. That's just who I gravitated to. Well, they were playing on my team. Remember how I told you how big they were? Basically, they were lying about their age. Like, I don't know how back then, like Pop Warner, they didn't like check as thorough as they probably check now. So I had guys that were not supposed to be on my team. They were supposed to be, actually, I think they were supposed to be playing high school at this point. If I'm not mistaken, you know who I'm talking about too if you're listening to this shit. I think they were supposed to be playing high school, but they were still playing Pop Warner. But that being said, my team, the Bell Eagles, were doing it. So when we'd have to do drills, tackle drills and stuff like that, I'm going up against this dude who's at that time seemed 1.5 feet taller than me. Then came the games. One team I remember specifically who I used to hate playing, but we happened to be in the same league as them. There were two. It was the Carson Tar Babies. I know that's weird to even say nowadays. I'm sure that doesn't exist anymore. And the Long Beach, the ones who play for Poly. Greater Compton was another one. Why were they rough to play, you ask? Because I'm at the line, right? Because I played lineman, I play center or guard or tackle, and I'm at the line because I was a chubby kid at this point. I was scarfing down a whole pizza, big old bowls of Captain Crunch. And I'm looking at my opponent. This dude got a mustache, he got big old hairy forearms, he got tattoos. He probably got 3 baby mamas in the stands, and he's supposed to be 12 years old. Nope. I remember that, man. They were loading their teams. The Pop Warner teams back then were loading their teams, dude. You had grown-ass men out playing against me, and I'm 12, I'm fat skinny. I'm fat, but like my arms are skinny, my legs are skinny, but I'm just fat skinny. You know what fat skinny is. Playing against these big old buff dudes who should be playing Pop Warner football. But that was fun. Raider games was another good time. There was a point in my life where I was really into football and baseball. Eventually, I just kind of gave up, and I was like, whatever. But I remember vividly the Raider games, and I met Tim Brown. My friend drove me. Well, my friend's dad drove me and him and I think his cousin or something to a Raider game. And that was back when you could tailgate, so I remember it being an all-day thing. And looking back, one thing I remember is we were kids, right? But you don't say shit. You shut up and you just enjoy the moment. But I remember there was a cooler like in the back seat, like right within arm's reach of the driver. So my friend's dad is chugging beers on the way to the game. And if I'm not mistaken, it was in San Diego. I could be wrong, but something wants me to say it was in San Diego. So it was like a couple hour drive or so. It wasn't, I don't feel like it was in LA for some reason. It felt like it was forever. I could be wrong, but there was a cooler within arm's reach. And shit, every 33 minutes, he would grab a beer, crack that shit open, put it between his lap, and just drive. So he's chugging beer while he's driving, right? And then he'll just put the empty bottles under the seat. I remember this like it was yesterday, but once again, when you're a kid, you don't realize this guy could kill us, basically. So drinking beer's there, right? So by the time we get to the stadium, which felt like forever, but it's fun. You're hanging out with your friends, you're joking on each other. One falls asleep, you fart in his face, you put your finger in the butt and put it up his nose, like dumb shit, right? We get there. Pops had to be already 6 beers in. I just remember him stopping a couple times to pee, and like looking back, he was probably in the bathroom doing some sort of substance that he should. And I just remember we get there, him drinking all day. tailgating, drinking, going to the game, drinking. So by the time it's time to leave, looking back, I remember, and I remember he was faded. Like but I don't. On a scale of 1 to 10 now, looking back as an adult, he was a 10 for sure. He should not have been driving us home, and he should not have. Damn sure he just even been driving. He should not have been driving whatsoever. But he got us home. Got us home. Different time, man. Oh, another thing, he smoked. So, not only did he smoke, but he didn't want his cigarette to go out fast, so he would roll up the windows and just smoke. So we're getting hotboxed by nicotine. Like, anybody who lived in the 80s and 90s knows exactly what I'm talking about. But it was a good time. It was a really good time. Bell Gardens, looking back, I'm really glad I moved there. I can't go any further without giving a shout out to my white friend Roger. He was one of the last, if not the last, white guy in Bell Gardens. Obviously joking about that, but he was the only white guy in the neighborhood. And he lived right in the front. And then his family got smart. I think they moved to Big Bear or something like that. Far away. Far away. And I remember his dad telling me, not in a negative way, but I remember him telling me at times that, Bell Gardens used to have a lot more people like him, more white folk. To which it sure did. Bell Gardens, 50s, 60s. I'm part of certain Facebook groups that talk about Bell Gardens, and it's just really cool listening to people's their history of Bell Gardens. And it's so interesting that 60s, early 70s, Bell Gardens was all white. Very, very interesting to me. But yes, Roger moved. We eventually ended up moving to Downey. We moved to Downey right before I was to become a senior. And I remember that being a big deal and a really, really rough time in my life. 8th grade. I've built up these friendships in Bell Gardens over the past few years. And here we are, moving to Downey. Me, my mom, and my little brother. It was hard. Because back then, keep in mind, there was no internet. There was no, hey, add me on Instagram, and your mom will drop my mom off. We're lucky if we wrote each other's numbers down on a piece of paper to stay in touch. Which is one of the reasons I went so long without connecting with my friends in Bell Gardens who were so important to my life. And I just want to thank you guys. Renee, Tony, Ramiro, Ruben, Danny, Jose, Gabriel, Skinny Rick, Fat Rick. And see, back then that was another thing. It was such a good time. We had 2 Ricks in our crew. One was Skinny Rick and one was Fat Rick. Shit, that's a dilemma when you're a kid. You have 2 Ricks. You have 2 people with the same name in your crew. How do you differentiate them? Okay, well, you call one Skinny Rick and you call one Fat Rick. And that's just what you did back then. You can never do that nowadays, but shout out to those guys, man. Shout out to the Bell Gardens Church of God. That was a very fun experience because I haven't talked about my best friend, Rick. My best friend Rick lived across the street from the Bell Gardens Church of God. Now, off top, I just went to church for the social aspect of it. I really don't truly know, even looking back, I don't think I really ever truly 100% believed what I was being told. It's no knock on anyone who does. That's just me personally. I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I'm just saying I don't know. And I definitely don't know if these stories you're telling me are true. But that's a little too deep. Going to church was fun. I was in Christmas plays. I would go to Wednesday youth Bible meeting. It was looking back, it was fun. But it was because there were some cute girls there and we took trips every once in a while. So that's really the main reason I went. My little brother ended up going to preschool there. And it's still there. I went to visit it maybe about 5 years ago. Definitely a trip. Definitely a trip, and a great, great trip down memory lane. At the end of the day, Bell Gardens was really good to me. And if I could, I wouldn't change anything about it. But it was rough going to a new school in a whole new environment in Downey, California in 1992. And I'm going to save that for part 3. I'll talk to you soon.